Arizona Territory, 1865. The war between the states was drawing to its bloody conclusion, but in these harsh, sun-scorched lands, another conflict raged on, one that saw no distinction between soldier and civilian, man and woman, adult and child. Eleanor Blake stood on the porch of her father's ranch house, watching as the last light of day painted the distant mesas in hues of gold and crimson. At 22, she possessed a quiet strength that came from a life spent in this unforgiving landscape. Her father, James Blake, had carved the Whispering Pines Ranch from nothing but dust and determination after her mother died of fever when Eleanor was just 10. Now it was one of the most prosperous properties in the territory, with over 300 head of cattle and the clearest water source for 20 miles. "Ellie," her father called from inside, "storm's coming. Best bring in the wash." She turned to see him framed in the doorway, his weathered face creased with the familiar lines of concern that had deepened since the Apache raids had intensified. "I'll get it, Pa," she replied, gathering her skirts to step down into the yard. As she collected the sun-dried linens from the line, the first rumble of thunder rolled across the valley. The air felt heavy, electric with anticipation. Eleanor worked quickly, the wind tugging at her honey-brown hair that had come loose from its practical braid. By the time she finished, the first fat raindrops were splattering against the hard-packed earth, kicking up tiny clouds of dust before the ground could absorb the moisture. Eleanor hurried back to the house, arms full of folded sheets and shirts, the clean scent of sun-dried cotton surrounding her. Later that night, as the storm howled around their sturdy home, Eleanor sat by the fire mending one of her father's shirts. James Blake cleaned his rifle at the table, a habit he'd developed since Apache raiders had attacked the Henderson place 2 valleys over. "Might be best if you went to stay with your aunt in Tucson for a spell," he said without looking up. Eleanor's needle paused mid-stitch. "I'm not leaving you here alone, Pa. I'd feel better knowing you were safe. And I'd feel better staying right where I am," she countered, her voice gentle but firm. "This is my home too." James sighed, his broad shoulders slumping slightly. "You're just as stubborn as your mother was." Eleanor smiled at that. It was the highest compliment he could give. The storm intensified, rain lashing against the windows like tiny fists demanding entry. The wind moaned through the eaves, an eerie counterpoint to the crackling fire. And then, barely audible beneath the tempest's fury, came another sound, a knocking at the door. James was on his feet in an instant, rifle in hand. "Get behind me," he ordered. Eleanor set aside her sewing and moved to stand behind her father's shoulder as he approached the door. "Who's there?" James called, his voice hard as iron. No answer came, only another weak rap against the wood. With practiced caution, James unlatched the door, keeping his rifle ready. The wind tore the door from his grasp, flinging it open. Illuminated by a flash of lightning, a figure collapsed across their threshold. A young man, his copper skin slick with blood and rain, his black hair plastered to his face. An Apache warrior, no older than 20, with an arrow embedded in his shoulder and a bullet wound in his side. "Jesus Christ," James muttered, raising his rifle. "Pa, wait!" Eleanor pushed past her father, dropping to her knees beside the wounded man. "He's barely alive." "He's Apache," James growled. "He's a human being," Eleanor countered, already assessing the wounds. The young warrior's eyes fluttered open momentarily, dark and filled with pain, before closing again. "We can't just let him die. If any of our neighbors find out we've harbored an Apache, then we won't let them find out." Eleanor met her father's gaze with unwavering determination. "Please, Pa, I couldn't live with myself if we turned him away." James Blake looked at his daughter, then at the wounded Apache, his weathered face a battlefield of conflicting emotions. Finally, he lowered his rifle. "Get my medical kit," he said gruffly, "and bolt the door." Together they carried the unconscious warrior to the small storage room off the kitchen. Eleanor worked quickly, cutting away the young man's bloodied buckskin shirt to expose his wounds. The arrow had gone clean through his shoulder, and the bullet had grazed his side, leaving a deep, angry furrow. "He's lucky," James commented, examining the wounds. Nothing vital hit. Eleanor cleaned the injuries with whiskey, her hands steady despite the gravity of what they were doing. The young Apache stirred, his eyes opening briefly to meet hers, eyes dark as midnight, filled with a mixture of pain, confusion, and something else. Recognition, perhaps, or gratitude. "It's all right," she whispered. though she knew he likely didn't understand her words. "You're safe now." As she worked, Eleanor noticed markings on his chest, tattoos that told stories she couldn't read. His face, though contorted with pain, carried a certain dignity. This was no random raider. There was something in his bearing, even in unconsciousness, that spoke of importance. "He'll need to stay hidden," James said, watching as Eleanor bandaged the wounds. "If the army patrol comes through and finds him here—" "I'll take care of him," Eleanor promised. "No one will know." Later that night, after her father had gone to bed, Eleanor returned to check on their unexpected guest. The young warrior was awake, his dark eyes following her movements as she brought him water. "My name is Eleanor," she said softly, helping him drink. "Do you understand me?" He didn't respond, but something in his gaze told her he comprehended more than he revealed. "I need to call you something," she continued, keeping her voice low. "Do you have a name you can tell me?" The young man swallowed, then whispered a single word. "Kohana." "Kohana," Eleanor repeated, the name feeling foreign, yet somehow right on her tongue. "It's good to meet you, Kohana." A faint ghost of a smile touched his lips before pain overtook him again. Eleanor adjusted his blankets, then quietly left him to rest. Outside the storeroom, she leaned against the wall, her heart pounding with the enormity of what they'd done. Harboring an Apache warrior was more than dangerous. It was potentially fatal. If discovered, they would be branded as traitors. Their ranch could be seized, their lives forfeit. Yet as Eleanor recalled the wounded man's eyes, she knew she had made the only choice her conscience would allow. Whatever consequences might come, she would face them knowing she had acted with humanity in a land that too often forgot such virtues. What she couldn't know as she finally retired to her bed that stormy night was just how severe those consequences would be, or how completely they would transform her life. For 3 weeks, Eleanor and her father kept Kohana hidden in the storeroom, tending to his wounds and gradually nursing him back to health. Though he spoke little, his understanding of English became apparent. Eleanor found herself spending increasing amounts of time with him, initially out of duty, then out of genuine curiosity. "Why were you alone that night?" she asked him one afternoon as she changed his bandages. "Where is your family?" Kohana's face remained impassive, but his eyes, those expressive dark eyes, clouded with something that might have been grief. "My father is chief," he said at last, his English halting but comprehensible. "I was scouting. Soldiers attacked our camp. Many died. I was hunting enemies when I was shot." Eleanor's hands stilled. "I'm sorry." "You have nothing to be sorry for," Kohana replied. "You saved me when your people would kill me." "Not all my people think alike," she said softly. "Just as I'm sure not all Apache are the same." A hint of a smile touched Kohana's lips. "You are wise, Eleanor Blake." As the days passed, Kohana grew stronger. Soon he could stand, then walk short distances. Eleanor found herself drawn to his quiet dignity, his stoic resilience. He told her of Apache ways, of their connection to the land, of how the white settlers had disrupted generations of tradition. She, in turn, spoke of her mother's death, of her father's determination to build something lasting in this harsh territory. In the hours they spent together, something unspoken began to grow between them, a bridge spanning 2 worlds that had long been at war. Then came the day that changed everything. Eleanor was collecting eggs from the henhouse when she heard the pounding of hooves. Peering around the corner of the coop, she saw 5 army soldiers approaching the ranch house, led by Lieutenant Miller, a man known for his ruthless efficiency in handling the Apache problem. Heart-hammering, Eleanor abandoned the eggs and raced to the house, slipping in through the back door. Her father was already moving toward the storeroom where Kohana rested. "Stay here," James told her, his face grim. "Let me handle this." Eleanor nodded, but the moment her father stepped outside to greet the soldiers, she hurried to the storeroom. "Kohana," she whispered urgently, "soldiers are here. You need to hide." The young Apache warrior was already on his feet, his body tense like a cornered wolf. "They know I am here," he stated, not a question, but a certainty. "How could they?" Eleanor asked. But even as the words left her mouth, she remembered the Henderson family from 2 valleys over. They had visited 3 days ago, bringing supplies. Had they seen something? Heard something? "I must go," Kohana said, reaching for the knife James had reluctantly returned to him the day before. "You're not strong enough yet," Eleanor protested. Kohana's hand caught hers, his touch sending an unexpected jolt through her. "Eleanor Blake," he said, his voice low and intense. "You have done what no one else would do, I will not forget." Before she could respond, the sound of raised voices came from outside. Eleanor peered through the window to see Lieutenant Miller gesturing angrily, her father standing firm, arms crossed. "They're searching for you," she whispered. "We need to get you out." Eleanor's mind raced. Behind the house, a small creek cut through their property, eventually leading to a dense patch of woods. If Kohana could reach those trees— "Come," she said, making a quick decision. "Follow me." They slipped out the back door, keeping low. Eleanor led him toward the stables, intending to circle around to the creek. They had nearly reached the shelter of the barn when a shout went up. "There! By the stables!" Everything happened at once. Soldiers came running, rifles raised. James Blake roared in protest. Kohana pushed Eleanor behind him, his knife glinting in the sunlight. "Run!" he commanded her. "I will not have you die for me." "I'm not leaving you," Eleanor insisted, panic rising in her throat. The first shot cracked across the yard. Eleanor felt Kohana flinch, but he remained standing, his eyes locked on the approaching soldiers. "Stop!" James Blake bellowed, placing himself between the soldiers and Eleanor. "That's my daughter." Lieutenant Miller's cold eyes assessed the situation. "Step aside, Blake. Your daughter's been harboring an enemy of the United States." "She's done nothing wrong," James insisted. "If anyone's to blame, it's me." "Pa, no!" Eleanor cried. The lieutenant signaled to his men. Two of them seized James while the others advanced on Eleanor and Kohana. "Eleanor Blake," Miller said, his voice carrying the weight of authority, "you are under arrest for aiding and abetting an enemy combatant." What happened next would replay in Eleanor's nightmares for years to come. Kohana, still weakened from his wounds, but driven by a warrior's instinct, lunged at the nearest soldier. The man fired, the bullet grazing Kohana's arm. In the chaos that followed, James broke free from his captors, rushing to protect his daughter. More shots rang out. James Blake fell, blood blossoming across his chest. "Pa!" Eleanor's scream tore through the air as she dropped to her knees beside her father. James looked up at her, his eyes already growing distant. "Run, Ellie," he whispered. "Run!" His hand went limp in hers. Through her tears, Eleanor was vaguely aware of Kohana fighting, of soldiers falling, of blood staining the dirt of her home. Then Kohana was gone, disappeared into the creek bed, and she was being dragged to her feet by Lieutenant Miller. "Your father died a traitor's death," he told her coldly, "and you'll hang for treason." But Eleanor didn't hang. Despite Lieutenant Miller's threats, the territorial governor was reluctant to execute a woman, especially the daughter of a once-respected rancher. Instead, she was imprisoned for 6 months, then released to a life far worse than execution. Her father's ranch was seized, the cattle sold, the house burned to the ground. Whispering Pines Ranch, built with years of her father's sweat and dreams, was gone. Worse, Eleanor was marked, branded a traitor and an Indian lover. No respectable family would take her in, no business would employ her. She survived by taking in washing from the brothels, living in a one-room cabin on land no one else wanted, miles from town. Some days, the only thing that kept her going was the memory of Kohana's words. "I will not forget." 4 years passed, each day a struggle against poverty and isolation. Eleanor's honey-brown hair became streaked with premature gray. Her once soft hands grew calloused and raw from lye soap and scrubbing. The pretty dresses she'd once worn gave way to practical patched garments. Yet she endured. And on the darkest nights, when loneliness threatened to consume her, she would step outside her small cabin and look up at the stars, wondering if somewhere a young Apache warrior remembered the woman who had saved him and lost everything. Arizona Territory, 1869. Eleanor Blake wiped sweat from her brow, pausing in her work to stretch her aching back. The vegetable garden behind her small cabin was beginning to show promise, green shoots pushing through the hard desert soil, a testament to her stubborn persistence. Like everything in her life now, it was a daily battle against the elements, against circumstance, against despair. 4 years had transformed her. At 26, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of one who has survived what should have broken her. The soft curves of her youth had given way to lean resilience. her once smooth face now weathered by sun and hardship, but her eyes remained the same, clear, intelligent, and undefeated. She had made a life for herself in this isolated spot, miles from the nearest town. Her cabin, though crude, was clean and sturdy. She grew what vegetables she could, kept chickens for eggs, and supplemented her meager income by taking in laundry from the mining camp 5 miles west. It wasn't the life she had envisioned for herself, but it was hers, built from the ashes of everything she had lost. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Eleanor gathered her tools and headed inside to prepare her simple evening meal. She had just set water to boil when she heard it, the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Visitors were rare and rarely welcome. The miners respected her enough to drop off and collect their laundry without lingering, but others came only to taunt the Apache whore, as she had been branded after her father's death. Eleanor reached for the rifle she kept loaded by the door, another legacy from James Blake, who had taught his daughter to shoot as soon as she could lift a gun. Moving to the window, she peered out at the approaching rider. The man sat tall in the saddle, his silhouette sharp against the setting sun. He wore a curious blend of clothing, buckskin pants and a white man's shirt. A wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. As he drew closer, Eleanor's finger tensed on the trigger. The stranger reined in his horse about 20 yards from her cabin. For a long moment he simply sat there as if giving her time to assess him. Then, with deliberate slowness, he removed his hat. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Long black hair, pulled back with a leather cord, copper skin burnished by the sun, and eyes, those eyes she had never forgotten, dark and intense as the night she had first seen them. "Kohana," she whispered, the name like a prayer on her lips. Lowering her rifle, Eleanor stepped outside, her heart pounding so hard she was certain he must hear it across the distance that separated them. The Apache warrior, no longer the wounded boy she had sheltered, but a man in his prime, dismounted with fluid grace. He stood beside his horse, making no move to approach, as if understanding her need for caution, for space. "Eleanor Blake," he said, his voice deeper than she remembered, his English much improved. "I have returned." Simple words, yet they sent a tremor through her that had nothing to do with fear. "Why?" she asked, her own voice steadier than she felt. "I made a promise," Kohana replied. "I said I would not forget." Eleanor's hands tightened on the rifle she still held. "It's been 4 years. 4 years, 2 months and 16 days, he corrected. I counted each one. Something in his precise accounting broke through the protective wall she had built around her heart. "You should not have come back," she said, even as everything within her contradicted the words. "It's dangerous for you here." Kohana took a step forward, then another. "I had to see what became of you," he said. "When I escaped that day, I heard the shots. I saw your father fall." His face, usually so composed, reflected genuine regret. "I have carried that knowledge like a stone in my chest." Eleanor swallowed hard against the sudden tightness in her throat. "It wasn't your fault," she said, though she had spent many bitter nights wondering if things might have been different. "What happened after?" Kohana asked, now close enough that she could see the new lines etched around his eyes, the small scar that crossed his left cheekbone. "They imprisoned me," Eleanor replied, the words coming more easily than she had expected. "When they released me, everything was gone. The ranch, our cattle, our good name." Kohana's eyes darkened with anger. "And you came here, alone? Where else could I go?" Eleanor's laugh held no humor. "I'm the woman who chose an Apache over her own kind. No one would have me." Silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken truths. The sun sank lower, painting the desert in gold and crimson, much as it had on that fateful day when a wounded warrior collapsed on her doorstep. "You should come inside," Eleanor finally said, stepping back. "Night falls quickly here." Kohana nodded, tethering his horse to the post near her small corral before following her into the cabin. The interior was spare but meticulously clean. A cast-iron stove, a narrow bed, a table with 2 chairs, shelves holding the few books Eleanor had managed to salvage. Everything worn but cared for, like Eleanor herself. She busied herself with the stove, adding wood to the fire, stirring the pot of beans she had left simmering. The simple domestic actions gave her hands something to do, while her mind grappled with Kohana's unexpected return. "You have made a home here," he observed, standing just inside the door, his presence filling the small space. "I've survived," Eleanor corrected, not looking at him. "It's not the same thing." Kohana moved to the table, his fingers tracing the grain of the wood. "I have come to repay my debt to you," he said quietly. Now Eleanor did turn, her brow furrowed. "There is no debt. You saved my life at the cost of your own," he insisted. "Everything you lost, your father, your home, your place among your people, was because of me." "I made my choice," Eleanor said firmly. "I don't regret it." Their eyes met across the small room, and something electric passed between them, an acknowledgement of the bond forged in those 3 weeks of healing, of shared confidences, of bridge building between worlds. "Why have you really come back, Kohana?" Eleanor asked softly. The Apache warrior's usually impassive face showed a flicker of vulnerability. "I told myself it was to repay a debt," he admitted. "But the truth is more selfish. I came because in 4 years I have not forgotten your face, your voice, your courage. I came because I had to know if you remembered me too." Eleanor's heart stuttered in her chest. "I remembered," she whispered. Kohana crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, stopping just short of touching her. "I am no longer the wounded boy you saved," he said, his voice low and intense. "I have become a leader among my people. I have wealth, horses, silver, land that even your government must recognize as ours by treaty." "What are you saying?" Eleanor asked, hardly daring to breathe. "I am saying that I can restore what was taken from you," Kohana replied. "Not your father. That loss cannot be undone. But land, a home, cattle, these things I can give you." Eleanor stepped back, her mind reeling. "You can't just buy back my life." "Not buy," Kohana corrected gently. "Return. What was wrongfully taken should be restored." "And then what?" Eleanor challenged. "You ride away with your debt paid, your conscience clear." Something flashed in Kohana's eyes, hurt, perhaps, or frustration. "Is that what you believe of me? That I would come all this way, risk my life in territory still hostile to my people, simply to ease my conscience?" Eleanor turned away, confusion warring with the hope that had begun to bloom in her chest. "I don't know what to believe anymore." Kohana's hand, warm and calloused, came to rest lightly on her shoulder. "Believe this," he said. "In the 4 years since you saved me, I have become a man of influence among both my people and yours. I have learned your language, your laws, your ways of doing business. I have gained the respect of men who once would have shot me on sight." "How?" Eleanor asked, turning to face him again. "The world is changing," Kohana explained. "The great war between your states has ended. New treaties are being made. My father, who still leads our band, has chosen the path of negotiation over war. And I, because of what you taught me about the possibility of understanding between our peoples, have become his voice in those negotiations." Eleanor studied his face, seeing the truth of his words in the confidence he now carried, in the wisdom that had replaced youthful intensity. "And now you've come to negotiate with me?" she asked, a hint of her old spirit flickering to life. The corner of Kohana's mouth lifted in what might have been a smile. "I have come to offer you a choice," he said, "a chance to reclaim what was taken from you, and perhaps—" He paused, something vulnerable crossing his face. "Perhaps a chance to build something new." Before Eleanor could respond, a sound outside drew their attention, the distant rumble of approaching horses. Kohana moved to the window with the silent grace of a predator, peering out into the gathering dusk. His body tensed. "Riders," he said, his voice suddenly hard. "4 of them." Eleanor joined him at the window, her heart sinking as she recognized the lead rider, Colonel Howard Becker, who had replaced Lieutenant Miller after the latter's death in an Apache ambush. Becker was worse than his predecessor, crueler, more calculating, and harboring a particular hatred for Eleanor Blake. "You need to hide," she said urgently, turning to Kohana. "Becker would kill you without hesitation." "And what would he do to you?" Kohana demanded, his hand moving to the knife at his belt. "Nothing he hasn't done before," Eleanor replied grimly. "Insults, threats, but he won't harm me physically. He enjoys my humiliation too much to end it." Kohana's eyes darkened with rage. "I will not hide while you face this man." "You must," Eleanor insisted. "If he finds you here, it will only confirm everything they've said about me. And this time they might not be satisfied with just taking my home." For a moment she thought he would refuse, Then, with visible reluctance, Kohana nodded. "Where?" "The cellar," Eleanor said, moving quickly to roll back the small rug that concealed a trapdoor. "It's not much, but it's kept my supplies safe from thieves." Kohana descended the narrow ladder into the dark space below, but before Eleanor could close the trapdoor, he caught her hand. "I will honor your wish," he said, his eyes intense in the shadows. "But know this, Eleanor Blake. I did not come back after 4 years only to lose you again." The simple declaration sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with fear. Eleanor squeezed his hand once, then closed the trapdoor and replaced the rug, just as the first pounding came at her door. "Open up, Blake!" Colonel Becker's voice carried the arrogant assurance of a man used to being obeyed. Eleanor took a deep breath, smoothed her skirts and opened the door. Colonel Howard Becker stood on her threshold, flanked by 3 of his men. At 40 he was still handsome in a hard way, his brown hair showing traces of grey at the temples, his uniform immaculate despite the dusty ride. "Colonel," Eleanor acknowledged coolly, "what brings you to my door at this hour?" Becker's gaze travelled over her, lingering in places that made her skin crawl. "Routine patrol," he said, his tone making it clear there was nothing routine about it. "We've had reports of Apache activity in the area." "I haven't seen any Apache," Eleanor replied, technically truthful. Becker's smile didn't reach his eyes. "No? That would be a change for you, wouldn't it, Miss Blake? Or do you prefer Apache whore? I hear that's what they call you in town." Eleanor refused to flinch at the crude insult. "Was there something specific you wanted, Colonel? Or did you ride all this way just to remind me of your poor manners?" A flash of anger crossed Becker's face. "Watch your tongue, woman. Your situation is precarious enough without antagonizing the only authority for 50 miles. "My situation is my own," Eleanor replied, "and you're trespassing on private property." Becker laughed, the sound devoid of humor. "Private property? This worthless patch of dirt? I could take it from you with a single piece of paper." "Then why haven't you?" Eleanor challenged, even as her heart raced at the thought of Kohana hidden below, listening to every word. Becker stepped closer, forcing Eleanor to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. "Maybe I enjoy watching you struggle," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Maybe I'm waiting for you to come begging." "I'll die first," Eleanor stated with quiet certainty. Something dangerous flickered in Becker's eyes. "That could be arranged." One of the soldiers behind him shifted uncomfortably. "Colonel, we should move on. Still got the Jenkins place to check before dark." Becker held Eleanor's gaze for a moment longer, then stepped back. "Search the cabin," he ordered. "You have no right," Eleanor began. "I have every right," Becker cut her off. "Military authority in time of conflict with hostile forces. Or have you forgotten whose side you're on, Miss Blake?" Eleanor stood rigidly as 2 soldiers entered her home, moving through the small space with callous disregard for her few possessions. Books were knocked from shelves, her bed linens disturbed, her meager food supplies poured through. All the while she prayed the trapdoor would remain undiscovered. "Nothing, sir," one of the soldiers reported after a few minutes. "Place is clean." Becker looked disappointed. "Mount up," he ordered, then turned back to Eleanor. "This isn't over, Blake. One day your Apache friends will come back for you, and when they do, I'll be waiting. And this time you'll hang alongside them." Eleanor said nothing, standing tall despite the fear coiling in her stomach. Only when the soldiers had ridden out of sight did she close the door, her hands trembling as she lifted the rug and opened the trapdoor. Kohana emerged from the darkness like a spirit, his eyes blazing with controlled fury. "That man," he said, his voice deceptively calm, "has threatened you before." It wasn't a question, but Eleanor nodded anyway. "Becker has made his intentions clear on several occasions. And you face him alone each time." Kohana's admiration was evident, but so was his anger. "This is no life for you, Eleanor Blake." "It's the only life I have," she replied simply. Kohana moved closer, his presence both comforting and unsettling. "No," he said with quiet certainty, "it is not." And in that moment, looking into his eyes, Eleanor began to believe him. The weeks that followed transformed Eleanor's life in ways she could never have imagined. True to his word, Kohana set about restoring what had been taken from her, and more. He did not stay at her cabin. Such an arrangement would have been too dangerous for both of them. Instead, he established a camp in the hills above her property, visible only to those who knew where to look. Each day he would appear at dawn, working alongside her until dusk, returning to his hidden camp only when darkness provided cover. Through a network of contacts that spanned both Apache and white communities, Kohana began acquiring land, not just any land, but specific parcels that had once formed part of Whispering Pines Ranch. Eleanor was astonished to discover that he had spent years meticulously tracking the sale and resale of her father's property. "How did you do this?" she asked one evening as they sat on her porch, examining the deeds he had presented to her, legal documents with her name clearly stated as the owner. "I told you I learned your ways," Kohana replied, a hint of pride in his voice. "I found men who respect gold more than they hate Apache. And I found others, good men like your father, who believe in justice. One such man was Judge Thomas Holloway, a territorial justice who had always harbored doubts about the seizure of the Blake property. When presented with evidence that the original confiscation had been legally dubious, evidence Kohana had spent years gathering, the judge had been instrumental in facilitating the return of the land. But land was only the beginning. Within a month, a small herd of cattle grazed on Eleanor's newly expanded property. A sturdy barn rose where only scrub brush had stood before. Mexican vaqueros, hired by Kohana, helped establish fences and water systems. Eleanor threw herself into the work, her body growing stronger, the grey in her hair less noticeable against her sun-kissed skin. For the first time in 4 years, she began to hope again, to dream beyond mere survival. And through it all, there was Kohana, working beside her, teaching her Apache ways of reading the land, learning from her about cattle management. In the evenings, they would sit outside her cabin, the desert stars wheeling overhead, and talk, really talk, about their lives, their dreams, the worlds they had each navigated. "My father has made peace with the army," Kohana told her one night. "Not all Apache have. There are bands that still raid, still fight." "And you?" Eleanor asked. "Where do you stand?" Kohana was silent for a long moment. "I stand where I can do the most good for my people," he finally said. "Sometimes that means fighting. Sometimes it means making peace. Always it means surviving. Is that why you've done all this?" Eleanor gestured to the transformed land around them. "To help your people survive." Kohana turned to her, his eyes reflecting the starlight. "I did this for you," he said simply. "Because when I was nothing but an enemy, a wounded stranger, you saw me as a man. You gave me life, Eleanor Blake. Everything else flows from that." Something shifted between them that night, a barrier falling, a possibility opening. When Kohana left for his camp in the hills, Eleanor watched him go with a new awareness of the emptiness he left behind. The following day brought clouds, a rare promise of rain in the parched territory. Eleanor was mending fence on the eastern boundary of her property when she spotted riders approaching, not from the direction of town, but from the north where the Apache reservation lay. Kohana, working on the barn roof, tensed visibly. He climbed down, moving to stand beside Eleanor as 3 Apache warriors drew near, their faces painted for what Eleanor recognized as a diplomatic mission rather than war. The leader, an older man with deep lines etched in his copper face, wore a combination of traditional Apache clothing and items clearly acquired from white traders. A silver medal hung at his chest, a peace medal given by the U.S. government to tribal leaders who signed treaties. "My father," Kohana said quietly to Eleanor, a note of respect and apprehension in his voice. Chief Nayati dismounted with the dignity of age, his dark eyes taking in the scene before him, his son standing shoulder to shoulder with a white woman, a ranch rising from the desert under their combined efforts. "Father," Kohana greeted him in Apache, then switched to English for Eleanor's benefit. "This is Eleanor Blake, the woman who saved my life." Nayati studied Eleanor with penetrating eyes. "I have heard much of you," he said, his English heavily accented but clear. "My son says you have the courage of 10 warriors and the wisdom of an elder." Eleanor inclined her head respectfully. "Your son honors me with words I have not earned." A flicker of approval crossed the chief's weathered face. "He also says you lost everything because you chose to save an Apache life." "I lost much," Eleanor acknowledged, "but not everything." Nayati glanced at his son, an unspoken message passing between them. "My son has not returned to our camp for many days," the chief said. "Now I see why." Kohana stepped forward. "Father, Nayati raised a hand, silencing him. "I did not come to take you back, my son. I came to see for myself this woman who has captured your heart, and this place where you now spend your days." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks at the chief's direct words. Beside her, Kohana stood tall, neither confirming nor denying his father's assessment. "You are welcome here, Chief Nayati," Eleanor said, finding her voice. "Would you and your men take water and food with us?" The older man's eyes crinkled slightly at the corners, the barest hint of a smile. "We will." That afternoon was unlike any Eleanor had experienced. Sitting at her small table, now expanded with planks to accommodate their guests, she watched as Kohana interacted with his father. There was clear respect between them, but also tension, the inevitable strain between a traditional leader and a son who had found his own path. The two Apache warriors who had accompanied Nayati remained largely silent, observing everything with careful eyes. Eleanor served a simple meal of stew and cornbread, the atmosphere thick with unspoken questions. Finally, as the meal concluded, Nayati addressed his son in Apache. Though Eleanor couldn't understand the words, the intensity behind them was unmistakable. Kohana replied in the same language, his voice steady but passionate. Occasionally his gaze would flicker to Eleanor, and she knew with certainty that she was the subject of their discussion. Eventually Nayati switched to English. "You understand what this means," he said to his son. "The path you choose." "I do," Kohana replied, without hesitation. The chief turned to Eleanor. "And you, Eleanor Blake, do you understand what it means to stand between two worlds, neither fully accepted by one, nor completely belonging to the other?" Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "With respect, Chief Nayati, I have lived in that space for 4 years now. I am already a woman without a people." Something like approval flickered in the old man's eyes. "Perhaps," he said thoughtfully, "or perhaps you are a woman at the beginning of a new people." He rose from the table with the fluid dignity that seemed to run in Kohana's family. "My son has chosen his path. I will not stand in his way." The visitors departed as the first raindrops began to fall, leaving Eleanor and Kohana standing side by side on the porch, watching them disappear into the gathering storm. "What did he mean?" Eleanor asked quietly. "About you choosing a path?" Kohana turned to her, rain beading in his black hair, his eyes intense with emotion he rarely displayed. "He meant that I have chosen you, Eleanor Blake, not just to repay a debt, not just to right a wrong, but because in all the years since you saved me, no other woman, Apache or white, has touched my heart as you have." Eleanor's breath caught. "Kohana, I do not ask for your answer now," he continued. "I ask only that you consider what might be possible between us, not as it was, a wounded boy and his savior, but as we are now, a man and a woman who have each lost one world and might together build another." The rain fell harder, drumming on the roof, turning the yard to mud. Neither of them moved to seek shelter. "People will never accept us," Eleanor said, giving voice to the fear that had lurked beneath her growing feelings. "Not your people, not mine." "Some already do," Kohana countered. "My father, Judge Holloway, the vaqueros who work your land without question. The world is changing, Eleanor. Perhaps not quickly enough, perhaps not completely enough, but it is changing." He took her hands in his, an intimacy they had not yet shared. "I do not promise an easy path," he said softly, "but I promise to walk it with you wherever it leads." In that moment, with rain soaking through her clothes and Kohana's hands warm around hers, Eleanor made her choice, the same choice she had made 4 years ago when a wounded warrior collapsed across her threshold. The choice to see beyond boundaries, beyond prejudice, beyond fear. She leaned forward and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, the meeting of two people who had imagined this moment but never truly believed it could happen. Then Kohana's arms encircled her, pulling her against him, and the kiss deepened into something urgent and profound. When they finally parted, both breathless, Kohana rested his forehead against hers. "Eleanor Blake," he murmured, "you continue to surprise me." She smiled, feeling truly alive for the first time in years. "Good," she replied. "I would hate to become predictable." The days that followed were filled with a joy Eleanor had thought forever lost to her. Kohana no longer returned to his camp in the hills, but stayed with her, the two of them working side by side to rebuild not just a ranch, but a life together. Word spread, as it inevitably would. Some of the vaqueros left, uncomfortable with the relationship developing between their employer and the Apache. Others stayed, either out of loyalty or indifference to social conventions. The women in town who had previously given Eleanor their laundry stopped coming, forcing her to find new sources of income. But Judge Holloway, true to his principles, brought her business from the courthouse and encouraged others to do the same. Through it all, Eleanor and Kohana grew closer, learning each other's ways, building a shared language of gestures and traditions. He taught her to track game across the desert floor. She showed him how to bake the bread her mother had once made. At night, they would lie beneath the stars, making plans for the future, a future neither had dared to imagine before. But even as they built their new world, the old one lurked at the edges, waiting. The confrontation, when it came, arrived on a clear autumn day. Eleanor was in the garden, harvesting the last of the summer vegetables, when she heard the now familiar sound of approaching riders. Looking up, she saw a dust cloud on the horizon, too large for a casual visit. Kohana emerged from the barn, rifle in hand, his expression grim. "Get inside," he told her, his voice leaving no room for argument. For once, Eleanor didn't protest. She hurried to the cabin, grabbing her own rifle from its place by the door before positioning herself at the window. As the riders drew nearer, her heart sank. Colonel Becker led at least a dozen soldiers, their blue uniforms stark against the desert landscape. Behind them came a second group, townspeople, men Eleanor recognized from Tucson, including several who had been her father's friends before his death. Kohana stood his ground in the yard, rifle held ready but not aimed, as the procession halted about 30 yards from the cabin. "Apache!" Becker called out, his voice carrying easily in the still air. "Step away from the Blake woman's property." "This is my home," Kohana replied calmly, "and you are trespassing." A murmur ran through the assembled men. Becker's face darkened with anger. "This land belongs to white settlers, not Apache savages. Whatever arrangement you've made with the Blake whore ends today." Eleanor felt rage surge through her at Becker's words. Before she could think better of it, she was out the door, rifle in hand, moving to stand beside Kohana. "This is my property, Colonel Becker," she declared, her voice steady despite her pounding heart. "Legally deeded to me by Judge Holloway himself, and Kohana is here at my invitation." "An invitation to your bed, no doubt," Becker sneered, prompting laughter from some of his men. "You've confirmed what everyone's been saying about you for years, Blake. Indian lover in more ways than one now, aren't you?" Eleanor felt Kohana tense beside her but kept her focus on Becker. "What I do on my property is no concern of yours, Colonel. Now state your business or leave." Becker's expression hardened. "My business is enforcing the law, Miss Blake, and the law says no Apache is permitted off the reservation without military escort." He gestured to Kohana. "This one's coming with us." "He has permission to be here," Eleanor countered, "from Chief Nayati, who signed the treaty with your government." "Permission to visit for trade, perhaps," Becker acknowledged with a cold smile. "Not permission to take up residence with a white woman. That violates both military law and common decency." One of the townsmen, a graying rancher named Samuel Porter, who had once been James Blake's friend, urged his horse forward. "Eleanor," he said, his voice carrying a note of genuine concern beneath its sternness, "your father was a good man. He wouldn't want to see you like this, living in sin with an Apache. Come back to town with us. We can find you proper work, a proper place to live." "A proper place?" Eleanor repeated, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. "Like when I returned from prison to find my home burned and my father's friends turning their backs on me. Where was your concern then, Mr. Porter?" The older man had the grace to look ashamed. "Times were different then. Tensions were higher. And they're not high now." Eleanor gestured to the armed men surrounding her home. "This looks like war to me." Becker cut in impatiently. "Enough talk. Apache, you're coming with us peacefully or otherwise." Kohana's voice, when he spoke, carried the quiet authority that had first drawn Eleanor to him. "I will not go," he stated simply. "This is my home now, with this woman. If that violates your law, then your law is wrong." A tense silence followed his declaration. Eleanor could feel the moment balancing on a knife's edge. One wrong move, one nervous trigger finger, and bloodshed would be inevitable. Then, unexpectedly, another voice joined the confrontation. "Colonel Becker, hold your position." All heads turned to see Judge Thomas Holloway riding toward them, accompanied by two Apache warriors, the same men who had visited with Chief Nayati weeks earlier. The judge, a tall man with iron-gray hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent decades dispensing frontier justice, drew his horse up beside Becker's. "What is the meaning of this assembly, Colonel?" he demanded, his voice carrying the weight of territorial authority. "This appears dangerously close to an unauthorized military action." Becker's jaw tightened. "I'm enforcing reservation boundaries, Your Honor. This Apache has no right to be here." "Actually," Judge Holloway countered, "he does." He reached into his coat and withdrew an official-looking document. "By special dispensation of the territorial governor, in recognition of services rendered to the United States government, Kohana, son of Chief Nayati, has been granted the right to live and work on lands adjacent to the reservation, including this property which is now legally owned by Miss Eleanor Blake." Murmurs of surprise ran through the assembled men. Becker snatched the document from the judge's hand, his eyes scanning it with growing disbelief. "This is irregular," he protested. "Unprecedented." "So are many things on the frontier, Colonel," Holloway replied dryly. "The governor believes that peaceful coexistence between our peoples requires flexibility in certain cases." "Flexibility?" Becker spat the word. "You mean allowing a savage to live with a white woman? That's not flexibility. That's an abomination." Eleanor stepped forward, her rifle still ready but her voice calm. "The only abomination here, Colonel, is your hatred. Kohana has done more for peace between our peoples than your bullets ever will. He negotiated treaties that saved lives on both sides. He's helped rebuild what your predecessor destroyed." "And what would your father say about you taking an Apache to your bed?" Becker demanded, his face flushed with anger. "My father," Eleanor replied, her voice steady, "taught me to judge people by their actions, not their birth. Kohana saved my life when everyone else had abandoned me. He restored what was wrongfully taken. He has shown more honor than any man I've ever known." She paused, drawing strength from Kohana's presence beside her. "If my father were here, I believe he would be proud of the man I've chosen." Judge Holloway cleared his throat. "The document is legal and binding, Colonel. Unless you wish to defy the territorial governor's direct order, I suggest you and your men withdraw." For a moment it seemed Becker might refuse. His hand hovered near his sidearm, his eyes burning with hatred as they moved from Eleanor to Kohana and back again. Then, with visible effort, he reined in his anger. "This isn't over," he promised, his voice low and dangerous. "Laws can be changed. Orders can be countermanded." "Perhaps," Judge Holloway acknowledged. "But until then you will respect them, and you will leave these people in peace." With a curt nod to his men, Becker wheeled his horse around. "Mount up!" he barked. As the soldiers prepared to depart, Samuel Porter lingered, his weathered face troubled. "Eleanor," he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone, "be careful. Becker won't let this go, and there are others who feel as he does." "I know," Eleanor replied softly, "but I won't live my life in fear anymore, Mr. Porter. Not of Becker, not of anyone." The older man studied her for a long moment, then glanced at Kohana. "Your father was my friend," he said finally. "For his sake, if nothing else, I'll do what I can to keep Becker in check." "Thank you," Eleanor said, meaning it. As the last of the riders disappeared in a cloud of dust, Judge Holloway dismounted, approaching Eleanor and Kohana with a weary smile. "That was closer than I would have liked," he admitted. "Becker was right about one thing. This arrangement is unprecedented." "How did you manage it?" Kohana asked, gesturing to the document the judge had reclaimed from Becker. Holloway's eyes twinkled. "Let's just say the governor owes me a few favors, and Chief Nayati's diplomatic skills proved quite persuasive." He nodded to the two Apache warriors who had accompanied him. "These gentlemen helped me understand the personal nature of the situation." Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks, but Kohana's hand found hers, his grip firm and reassuring. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now," the judge said, "you live your lives. Build your ranch. Show people that what they fear is possible, that two worlds can come together in peace." His expression grew serious. "It won't be easy. Becker has friends in high places, and many share his views. But you also have allies, more than you might think." As Judge Holloway prepared to leave, he took Eleanor aside. Your father would be proud, he told her quietly, not just of your courage, but of your capacity to see beyond boundaries. James Blake was the same way, always looking past what was to what could be. Tears pricked at Eleanor's eyes. Thank you for saying that. The judge mounted his horse, tipping his hat to both of them. I'll be checking in from time to time, he promised. The governor will want reports on how his experiment is progressing. After Holloway and the Apache warriors had departed, Eleanor and Kohana stood in the yard of their home, truly theirs now, in the eyes of both their peoples. Are you afraid? Kohana asked, studying her face. Eleanor considered the question. Not of Becker, she decided. Not any more, but of what lies ahead. The path we're choosing? She squeezed his hand. Yes, a little. Kohana nodded, understanding in his dark eyes. Fear is wisdom when facing the unknown, he said. My father taught me that. It keeps us alert, makes us plan carefully. And what does your heart tell you? Eleanor asked. A rare, full smile transformed Kohana's face. My heart tells me that some journeys are worth any risk, he said, drawing her into his arms. And that this one with you is just beginning. As the sun set over the Arizona territory, painting the desert in gold and crimson, just as it had on the night she first saved him, Eleanor Blake stood in the circle of Kohana's embrace, looking out at the land they had reclaimed together. The future stretched before them, uncertain but full of promise, a new beginning built on the ashes of what both had lost. And in that moment, with the man she loved beside her and the home they had created surrounding them, Eleanor knew that everything she had sacrificed had led her to exactly where she was meant to be. What had been lost had been returned. Not just land and livelihood, but hope, purpose, and a love that transcended the boundaries others had tried to impose. In saving Kohana all those years ago, Eleanor had ultimately saved herself, finding in his return not just restoration, but redemption. As darkness fell, they turned toward the light of their home, their shared home, hand in hand, ready to face whatever challenges tomorrow might bring. Together, Arizona Territory, 1875. The ranch house stood proudly against the backdrop of rugged mountains, its whitewashed walls gleaming in the morning sun. No longer the small cabin where Eleanor had once eked out a solitary existence, Whispering Pines Ranch had been rebuilt and expanded over the years, a testament to the persistence of its owners and the strength of their union. A child's laughter rang out across the yard as 6-year-old James Nayati Blake chased a puppy through the carefully tended garden. With his mother's honey-brown hair and his father's dark eyes, the boy embodied the bridge his parents had built between two worlds. Eleanor watched from the porch, one hand resting on her swollen belly where their second child grew. At 32, the hardships of her past had faded into memory, replaced by the joy of the life she and Kohana had created together. Not that the path had been easy. Colonel Becker had made good on his threat, lobbying against their union at every opportunity. But Judge Holloway had been right. They had allies. Chief Nayati, impressed by his son's commitment and Eleanor's strength, had become an unexpected advocate, using his influence with territorial officials to protect their unusual arrangement. Samuel Porter, true to his word, had rallied some of the old ranching families to their cause. And when Eleanor gave birth to James, even the most hardened prejudices had begun to soften in the face of a child who belonged to both communities. Kohana emerged from the barn, deep in conversation with one of their vaqueros. At 30, he had grown into his role as both rancher and diplomat, often traveling between the reservation and Tucson to help negotiate disputes. The silver streaks that had begun to appear in his black hair only added to his dignity. Catching sight of Eleanor, he excused himself and crossed the yard to join her, placing a gentle hand on her belly. "How are you feeling?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Eleanor smiled, covering his hand with hers. "Strong," she assured him, "though your daughter is restless today." "My daughter?" Kohana raised an eyebrow. "Yesterday you were certain it was another son." "A mother knows," Eleanor replied with mock solemnity, then laughed at his skeptical expression. "Either way, this child will be loved." Kohana's gaze moved to their son, now sitting in the dirt, solemnly explaining something to the puppy. "As he is loved," he said softly. Eleanor followed his gaze, her heart full. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "The choice you made, the life you might have had with your own people?" Kohana turned back to her, his eyes serious. "I am with my people," he said simply. "You, James, our unborn child, the ranch hands who share our vision. This is my tribe now." He touched her cheek gently. "And I have never, not for one moment, regretted the path that led me back to you." In the distance, a rider approached, Judge Holloway making one of his regular visits. He had become something of an uncle to young James, and his support had never wavered, even when Becker had finally succeeded in having him removed from the bench 2 years earlier. "We should invite Thomas to stay for supper," Eleanor suggested. "He brings news from Tucson." Kohana nodded, his expression thoughtful. "The world continues to change around us," he observed. "Sometimes for the better, sometimes not. But here," he gestured to their home, their land, their son, "here we have built something that will last." Eleanor leaned into his embrace, finding in it the same strength and comfort she had discovered on that rainy day 6 years ago when they had first acknowledged their feelings for each other. "Yes," she agreed, watching as their son ran to greet the approaching judge. "Something that will last." And as the Arizona sun bathed their home in golden light, Eleanor Blake knew with absolute certainty that the night she had saved Kohana, losing everything she had then valued, had been the beginning, not the end. For in that moment of courage and compassion, she had set in motion a story far greater than she could have imagined. A story of loss and restoration, of boundaries crossed and new worlds created. A story of love that, against all odds, had found a way to bloom in the harsh desert of prejudice and fear, transforming not just 2 lives, but all who witnessed its quiet, persistent strength. The story of Eleanor and Kohana reminds us that change begins with individual choices. To see another's humanity when society denies it, to offer help even when it comes at great cost, to love when it seems impossible. Their legacy challenges us to reflect on how often we judge others by labels rather than by character, and it inspires us to forge connections where history has carved divisions. For in their story, we uncover a profound truth. When love is allowed to flourish beyond the confines of prejudice and fear, it holds the power to transform not only individual lives, but the very fabric of our shared humanity. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end. If Eleanor and Kohana's journey moved you as much as it moved us, please help support our channel by subscribing, liking, leaving a comment, and sharing this story with someone who needs a little hope today. From the bottom of our hearts, every like and every word of encouragement keeps us going, keeps us inspired, and helps us bring you more beautiful stories filled with love, redemption, and unforgettable twists. At the end of this video, another story from our channel will appear. Click and be surprised by another emotional tale just like this one. We can't wait to share it with you.